On a quiet October night in 1989, 11-year-old Jacob Wetterling vanished while riding his bike home in rural Minnesota. No body, no clues, no answers for 27 long years. This is the case that haunted America until a shocking confession in 2016 revealed the unthinkable. Before we begin, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more real unsolved cases and true crime stories, and leave a comment with your thoughts on what happened that night. The night he vanished. On the evening of October 22, 1989, the quiet town of St. Joseph, Minnesota was wrapping itself in the stillness of a chilly autumn night. The air was crisp, the streets calm, and Halloween was just days away. For most families, it was an ordinary Sunday night. For the Wetterlings, it was the night that would fracture their lives forever. Jacob Wetterling, an energetic and kind-hearted 11-year-old, had spent the evening at his friend's house, along with his younger brother Trevor and their friend Aaron Larson. They'd watched television, eaten snacks, and laughed the way only children can, completely unaware that danger was waiting in the shadows. Around 9 p.m., the boys decided to head back to the Wetterling home about half a mile away. The night was moonless, the rural road dimly lit by scattered porch lights from the farmhouses that dotted the area. The boys rode their bikes, chatting and joking as they went. It was a familiar route, safe in their minds. But safety was about to shatter. As they approached a dark stretch of the road, a man suddenly stepped out from the shadows. He was wearing a mask, gloves, and dark clothing. In his hand was a handgun. His voice was calm but authoritative as he ordered the boys to stop and get off their bikes. The man asked their ages, then told Trevor and Aaron to run toward the woods and not look back. Jacob, however, was ordered to stay. The last thing Trevor and Aaron saw was their friend standing there in the cold night, obediently following the stranger's commands. The man forced Jacob into his vehicle, a blue sedan parked nearby, and drove off into the darkness. In a matter of seconds, Jacob had vanished from the road, swallowed by the night. Back at home, when Trevor and Aaron arrived, breathless and terrified, the Wetterling household erupted into panic. Patty and Jerry Wetterling immediately called the Stearns County Sheriff's Office. Within minutes, officers were at the scene. Searchlights swept the fields. Neighbors came out with flashlights. Dogs were brought in to track Jacob's scent. The small community of St. Joseph was not accustomed to crime, let alone the abduction of a child. Word spread quickly, and soon, dozens of volunteers joined law enforcement, combing the area through the night. Helicopters scanned the ground with thermal cameras. But by sunrise, there was still no trace of Jacob. In those first hours, hope was still strong. Many believed Jacob had simply been taken somewhere nearby and would be found soon. But as the hours stretched into days and the days into weeks, that hope began to fade. The night Jacob disappeared became the dividing line for the Wetterling family, the life they had before and the life they were forced to live after. The search and the silence. From the moment Jacob Wetterling vanished, the search for him became one of the largest and most intense manhunts in Minnesota's history. In the first 24 hours, more than 100 law enforcement officers, firefighters and volunteers scoured the area. The rural roads, the open fields, the nearby woods, all were swept with flashlights, search dogs, and the desperate hope that Jacob might still be somewhere close, waiting to be found. The Stearns County Sheriff's Office led the operation with assistance from the FBI and the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. Roadblocks were set up. Cars were stopped and searched. Neighbors were interviewed some multiple times. Police knocked on doors well into the night, asking if anyone had seen a suspicious vehicle, a masked man, or anything unusual. Helicopters hovered over the cornfields, their searchlights slicing through the darkness. Boats patrolled nearby waterways. Even abandoned wells and farm buildings were searched in case the abductor had hidden Jacob in a place where no one would think to look. The community of St. Joseph rallied around the Wetterlings. People brought food to searchers, handed out flashlights, and walked shoulder to shoulder across fields, scanning every inch of ground. Yet as thorough as the search was, it turned up nothing. No bike, no clothing, no sign of a struggle. It was as if Jacob had been erased from the earth. By the end of the first week, the reality began to set in. Jacob had not simply wandered off. He had been taken, and whoever had taken him had planned carefully enough to leave no trace. This was no accident, no random disappearance. It was an abduction. The FBI released a composite sketch based on descriptions from Trevor and Aaron. It showed a man with a narrow face, deep-set eyes, and a distinctive nose. Leads poured in over 50 tips a day at the peak of the investigation. But for every promising lead, there came a dead end. Rumors spread. Some believed Jacob had been taken for ransom. Others feared he had been targeted by a predator. Law enforcement publicly stated they were considering all possibilities. But behind closed doors, the word abduction was being used more and more. As days turned into weeks, the search efforts shifted from an urgent manhunt to a long-term investigation. The media covered the case relentlessly. Jacob's face appeared on TV in newspapers and on flyers pinned to telephone poles and shop windows across the state. His parents, Patty and Jerry, made emotional pleas for his safe return, their voices cracking under the weight of uncertainty. And yet, for all the visibility, there was a deafening silence from the one person who could answer the questions Jacob's abductor. No ransom note, no phone call, no traceable communication of any kind. It was as if he had vanished into a black hole, taking Jacob with him. The Wetterlings refused to give up. They organized community meetings, worked with child safety organizations, and urged the public to remain vigilant. The case was kept alive in the press, and Jacob's story became a rallying cry for better protections for children. But in those early months, as the seasons changed from fall to the deep cold of a Minnesota winter, the reality was heartbreaking. Jacob was still missing, and no one knew if he was alive. The silence was not just the absence of answers, it was the presence of fear, years of unanswered questions. In the months and years following Jacob Wetterling's disappearance, the investigation became a maze of leads, dead ends, and haunting uncertainty. The community that had once been consumed by an urgent search now settled into a grim reality. Jacob was gone, and no one knew where or why. The Stearns County Sheriff's Office, alongside the FBI, continued to chase every possible lead. Over 50,000 tips would come in over the years, from alleged sightings of Jacob to reports of suspicious individuals. Some tips came from Minnesota, others from as far away as Florida or California. Every single one was logged, investigated, and more often than not, eliminated. The early focus of investigators included known sex offenders in the area, people with a history of child abduction, and anyone who had been seen near the abduction site that night. There was one name that surfaced repeatedly: Danny Heinrich, a local man who had been questioned in connection with a separate assault on a boy in Painesville in 1989. Heinrich was interviewed, his car searched, and fibers were collected from his residence. Yet with no solid evidence linking him to Jacob, the case against him stalled. As the years passed, Jacob's story became more than just a local tragedy. It became a symbol of the dangers children face and the need for stronger protections. Patty Wetterling. Jacob's mother transformed her grief into advocacy, becoming a national voice for child safety. She worked with lawmakers to pass the Jacob Wetterling Crimes Against Children and Sexually Violent Offender Registration Act in 1994, which created a nationwide registry for sex offenders. Meanwhile, the case file grew thicker. Investigators re-interviewed witnesses, revisited physical evidence with evolving forensic technology, and conducted undercover operations. They tested soil samples, examined tire tracks, and even consulted psychics, though none of these efforts brought them closer to finding Jacob. Rumors persisted in the community. Some whispered that Jacob had been taken overseas. Others speculated he had been kept alive somewhere in secret. The lack of physical evidence left room for endless theories, each one more heartbreaking than the last. For the Wetterlings, every day without answers was its own form of torment. The seasons changed, birthdays came and went, but Jacob remained frozen in time at age 11. His room was kept much the same as it had been the day he disappeared, a silent monument to a boy who had never come home. Throughout the 1990s and into the early 2000s, law enforcement conducted periodic cold case reviews. New detectives were assigned to bring fresh eyes to the evidence. In 2004, DNA testing became advanced enough to reanalyze fibers and hair samples. But again, the results were inconclusive. In 2010, on the 21st anniversary of Jacob's disappearance, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released an age-progressed image showing what Jacob might look like at age 32. The photo was shared widely, sparking renewed hope and a flood of new tips. But like so many before them, those leads failed to break the case. By the time the 25th anniversary approached in 2014, Jacob's disappearance had become one of Minnesota's most infamous unsolved cases. The Wetterling family had lived more than 2 decades in a limbo of hope and grief, clinging to the belief that one day the truth would come out. What they couldn't know was that the man responsible had been hiding in plain sight all along, and when his name resurfaced in 2015, the long cold trail would finally begin to thaw. The breakthrough and confession. By 2015, it had been more than 26 years since Jacob Wetterling disappeared. The case file was enormous, tens of thousands of pages, countless interviews and physical evidence that had been tested and retested over the decades. For many, hope had long faded. But in a twist, no one saw coming. A piece of evidence from an entirely different case would reopen the door. In 2015, authorities were investigating a series of sexual assaults in Painesville, a town just 30 miles from where Jacob was abducted. The assaults had occurred in the late 1980s, around the same time Jacob vanished, and the suspect descriptions bore striking similarities to the man seen by Trevor and Aaron. One name kept coming up, Danny Heinrich. Heinrich had been questioned back in 1989, but was never charged. In 2015, investigators obtained a search warrant for his home in Annandale, Minnesota. What they found would not only reignite the Wetterling case, it would shatter the belief that Jacob might still be alive. Inside Heinrich's home, authorities discovered a trove of child pornography, over 150 images, and dozens of videos. Possession of such material was enough to charge him federally, but it was what Heinrich admitted during interrogation that stunned even the most seasoned investigators. Faced with the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison on pornography charges, Heinrich offered a deal. He would confess to abducting and killing Jacob Wetterling and lead authorities to his remains in exchange for avoiding charges directly related to the murder. The decision to make the deal was controversial, but for the Wetterling family, it meant one thing: they would finally know the truth and Jacob could come home. On September 1st, 2016, Heinrich led investigators to a remote field in Painesville. The spot was unremarkable. A quiet patch of farmland bordered by trees, the kind of place you could pass every day without a second glance. But beneath the soil lay the remains of an 11-year-old boy who had been missing for nearly 3 decades. Heinrich's confession was chilling. He described how on the night of October 22, 1989, he had been driving aimlessly when he spotted Jacob and the other boys riding their bikes. Acting on impulse, he stopped, pulled a gun, and took Jacob. He drove Jacob to a secluded spot near Painesville, forced him out of the car, and assaulted him. Afterward, fearing Jacob would identify him, Heinrich took out his gun and shot him twice in the head. Jacob died instantly. Heinrich then buried Jacob in a shallow grave, covering the site with debris and trash to hide it from view. In 1990, fearing discovery, he returned to the site, dug up Jacob's remains, and reburied them in a different location, the very place he took investigators in 2016. The confession broke the hearts of everyone who had hoped Jacob might still be alive. But for his family, there was a measure of relief in finally knowing what had happened. Patty Wetterling spoke to the press, her voice trembling but resolute. "Our hearts are broken. For us, Jacob was alive until we found him. We need to heal." In September 2016, Heinrich pleaded guilty to 1 count of child pornography in federal court. As part of the plea deal, He admitted to Jacob's abduction and murder, but was never charged for it. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, the maximum penalty for the pornography charges. It wasn't the justice many had hoped for, but it was the truth. And after 27 years, the mystery of Jacob Wetterling's disappearance was finally solved. Justice, legacy, and impact. When the courtroom doors closed in September 2016 and Danny Heinrich was led away in handcuffs, there was no cheering, no celebration. Justice, if you could call it that, felt incomplete. Heinrich had admitted to the kidnapping, assault, and murder of Jacob Wetterling, yet he would serve just 20 years, not for murder, but for possession of child pornography. For the Wetterling family, the outcome was bittersweet. They had their answers, but they had no true justice for the life taken. "There's no punishment that can bring Jacob back," Patty Wetterling said. "Our goal now is to make the world safer for kids, so no family has to go through this." Jacob's story had already reshaped the way America thought about child safety. In 1994, the Jacob Wetterling Crimes Against Children and Sexually Violent Offender Registration Act became law, establishing the first national registry for sex offenders in the United States. It was a landmark in child protection, and its legacy endures to this day. But Patty and Jerry Wetterling didn't stop there. They became tireless advocates for missing children and victims' rights. Patty served as chair of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and worked directly with law enforcement agencies to develop better response protocols for abductions. Jacob's disappearance also inspired changes in community awareness. Parents began teaching their children about stranger danger and the importance of personal safety. Neighborhood watch programs expanded, and local law enforcement began collaborating more closely with federal agencies in missing child cases. In Minnesota, Jacob became more than just a victim. He became a symbol of hope and resilience. Each year, the community holds events in his memory, not to dwell on the tragedy, but to honor his life and the changes it inspired. Schools teach students about Jacob's story, not to frighten them, but to remind them that vigilance matters. Still, for those closest to him, the pain never fully faded. Trevor Wetterling. Jacob's younger brother has spoken about the lasting trauma of that night and the guilt he carried for years. Aaron Larson. Jacob's best friend who was with him that night has said that every October 22 is like reopening an old wound. In 2020, Patty Wetterling reflected on her journey. For 27 years, we searched for Jacob. That search became our purpose. Now our purpose is to honor his memory by making the world a better place. Jacob's remains were laid to rest in a private ceremony attended by family, friends, and members of the community who had searched for him decades earlier. They said goodbye, not just to the boy they had lost, but to the years of uncertainty and the endless question of what happened. The truth had finally come out, but it was a truth that brought as much sorrow as closure. The fields of Painesville still stand quiet. The gravel roads still wind through the countryside. And on certain autumn nights, the air feels heavy with memory. Jacob Wetterling's story is one of heartbreak, but also of change. His life and legacy continue to protect children he never met in towns and cities far from where he grew up. In the end, the boy who vanished into the night left behind a light that still guides the way forward. Before we close this chapter, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the Jacob Wetterling case and the justice or lack of it that followed? Share your theories and feelings in the comments below. And if you want to hear more real-life mysteries and true crime stories, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next case. Every interaction helps keep these stories alive.